So welcome to the second session of the Ecologies of Justice Conference. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for those who were with us last week and who have joined us again. Today, I'm really excited. We have an excellent session on cultivating reentry success for women from the inside out. And I've put in the chat the link to ecologiesofjustice.org where you can read the full bios. But in lieu of a longer introduction, I'm going to turn it over now to Andrew Winn, who will introduce himself and the session. So thank you to the presenters for being here, and thanks to everyone for attending. So Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew, for the introduction. And yeah, welcome everybody to our panel. We're all affiliated with the Insight Garden program, which is a nonprofit here in California. We operate inside 10 California state prisons with therapeutic gardening program inside. With the literature attached to it and the curriculum attached to it. We also have a reentry program, and we're in all three women's facilities in California, and that really gets us to, we want to be able to introduce to you our work in the three women's programs, prisons here in California, how we're creating a gender responsive curriculum, and the reentry support that meets the needs of women and gender non-binary participants. With that, I am Andrew Winn. I'm the executive director of the Insight Garden program. I'm new here somewhat. I've started less than a year ago. Before that, I was with Sacramento State as the director of Project Rebound, a campus equity program for previously incarcerated students. I've done a lot of policy work to uplift previously incarcerated people throughout the years. On our panel, we have Michelle Mundia. Michelle her lived experience and strong connection to nature led Michelle to IGP to work as a program manager at the California Institute for Women. As a consultant in the public health sector for nearly 2 decades, Michelle has managed a multitude of projects, including evaluating the impact of rehabilitation programs on incarceration. She is dedicated to working with organizations that focus on building communities, restorative justice, and systems thinking. Michelle received her bachelor's from Cal Berkeley and a master's in public health from Boston University. She holds a certificate of alcohol and drug studies from UCLA and diversity, equity, and inclusion from University of South Florida Winn College of Business. She's most proud, however, of raising her 2 teenagers. Glad that you're here. Also on our panel, we have Jamala. I have his bio right here in front of me, but I actually know his bio almost so well. So I'm just gonna give it from what I know. So Jamala is became involved with Insight Garden while he was incarcerated at Lancaster. He spent nearly 31 years in prison, in maximum security prisons, almost half of which were done in solitary confinement within California's secured housing unit. He's really here with us because today, because there's been changes in how we view deviant behavior of youth. And luckily for him, some of the laws have changed and allowed him to get a second chance back at life. And so he's here with us. He's also a student at Cal State Fullerton, where he's a sociology major. And he's just really, committed to the uplifting of people, making sure that they have the things that they need. As somebody who's previously incarcerated, he's innately adept and being able to support people within our reentry services at Insight Garden. And then Michelle Scott is on here, and Michelle is an alumni of IGP. She was released after 31 years in prison in 2021. Michelle has written extensively about the healing power of gardening and nature and is published writer in the Marshall Project and Elle magazine. She will share her own reentry journey, including the gaps, successes she's experienced, and thoughts on gender responsive needs and services. So I just said a lot, and there's going to be much more to come. And so I want to remind everybody that if you can put your name, organization in the chat, that would be really helpful. In addition to that, if there are any questions that come up during our panel, I will be monitoring the chat, and I'm sure a couple other people will be monitoring it, and we'll try to include those questions as they arise. So yeah, I guess we're going to just start this off because we have Michelle Scott, and she has limited time right now, and we want to be able to listen to some of the things that she has to say. So Michelle, what about the healing power of gardening and connection to nature that's so important to you? And can you talk about some of the examples? Is she still on?
I was just noticing it appears as though she's dropped off here for now. She's having
Oh, no worries. No worries. We have another Michelle on our panel. Hi, Michelle. As the program manager at the California Institute for Women, what does gender responsive trauma informed mean? And then how does it show up in the curriculum?
Wow, let's start off heavy. As Andrew mentioned, I am the program manager at the California Institute for Women. So thank you all for being here. For the next few minutes, if you would like to share some data to provide context for how developing and facilitating programs in women's prisons specifically need to be gender and trauma responsive. Then I'd like to highlight how IGP, Inside Garden program, for the past 20 years have been working in meeting the needs of women in prison through gardening as a way to connect to themselves, their communities, and the natural world. So I hope that's a good plan for you all. I'll spend some time on that. And I'm gonna just do my best to screen share right now. I've tried this a couple of times, but it always doesn't work out sometimes. So give me a second here. Can you all see what I'm seeing here? Slide deck, great. Let me just turn it off. Okay, here. All right, thank you all for being patient. To begin with, I'll put up a couple of graphs for us to reflect upon, if that's okay with you. And hopefully the slides are moving, yeah? We'll take a moment with this one. And here's another more detailed statistics. And I want you to think about if there's anything that surprises you about this pie chart. It's a lot of data.
The slides aren't moving for us.
Aren't moving? Okay.
Yep, there we go.
Okay. I think what I have to do here now is just move this along. Are you looking at the incarcerated women? Let me see here. Slide deck. Yeah, the staggering picture is this, right? I mean, you have, let me see, this is not coming up here. You have incarcerated women increased by more than 475%, rising from a total of about 26,000 in 1980s to 210 in 2015. Women's incarceration rate has grown at twice the pace of men in recent decades. These two boxes are quite important. Sexual abuse is one of the primary predictors of girls' entry into the juvenile system. Majority of incarcerated females are parents to children under the age of 18. Another point that's important that I'll add is that, not surprising to you all, that Black and Native Indigenous women are overrepresented in jails and prison. And how is this the case? Over the past quarter century, there has been a profound change in the involvement of women within the criminal justice system. And we're talking about expansive law enforcement efforts, stiffer drug sentencing laws, and post-conviction barriers to reentry that I think uniquely impacts women. And I want to take a few moments here because there's a lot of information that I'd like for us to really feel. And I invite you to reflect deeply on the last two boxes that I shared, namely the prevalence of sexual trauma and separation from their children amongst incarcerated women. I will say there's definitely gender inequality when it comes to programming between men's and women's prisons. In other words, there lacks attention, resources, and services that address the unique dimensions to women and girls in jails or prisons. One case in point, due to the scarcity of female prisons in the United States, women are often incarcerated far from their homes. In fact, over 60% of mothers in prison are incarcerated more than 100 miles from their children, making visitation financially prohibitive and often impossible. And I'm sure you can imagine the impact on the foster care system. And with this picture in mind, if you'd like to share in the chat ideas on how we can better support women and girls who are incarcerated through gender and trauma healing focused lens in programming, because after all, there's such a high correlation between success in programming in prison inside and success in re-entering society. Using principle, and you're seeing this Inside Garden program slide, I hope. Let me see here. Using principles from systems thinking and practices from restorative justice, IGP employs the holistic program model that incorporates, as I like to say, the head, heart, and hands. We offer a 42-week program broken down into 4 learning arcs. The first 8 weeks focus on content materials such as, things like soil science, permaculture, consumerism, and how each elements are part of a larger ecosystem. I mean, we even talk about the cosmos in our curriculum. But more importantly, we start to build upon the notion and practice of how we are all interconnected. And we then follow this with the hands part of building a garden inside prison. And for at least several weeks, we dig, we plant, and nurture the land. If we're lucky, we're allowed to harvest. If not, at the very least, senses are elevated from the sight and smell of the garden, and hopefully the hearts open up a bit for some healing to come in. So after all that hands-on work on labor, we spend several more weeks on trauma, healing, and life skills. This is the heart space of IGP's curriculum, I think. And the intersectionality between gender and trauma informs not only what we do, but how we do the work inside prisons. But at the end of it, what does it really mean to be trauma responsive for programs? Let's think back to the realities of sexual trauma and separation from the children from the earlier slide that I showed. How can we ensure that our curriculum, programs, and how we facilitate take into account these realities for thousands of incarcerated girls and women? How can we re-envision a less patriarchal carceral system here? And I'll start, as a start, I believe that there are core elements that's important in programming specific to women's prison. And for more on this, I invite you to look at Dr. Stephanie Covington's work. Safety, and those 5 core principles, I believe, are safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. So safety, one example could be co-creating group agreements and structure. This is their space. You are a visitor. Another important safety feature is to ensure that our programming and the way that we facilitate do not re-traumatize women by asking them about past experiences for the sake of asking about trauma. So this is a place where I really encourage us program providers to check our positionality and privilege. So trustworthiness, consistency of facilitators, they follow through. Half of IGP staff, for example, are formerly incarcerated, and I know that their work inside brings a lot of trust and credibility. Choice is very important. They have to volunteer for the group versus force. it's also important to be sensitive to the level of disclosure that they want to share. We don't force that. In fact, we don't even ask why they're in prison in the first place. So collaboration, how do facilitators position themselves? Do participants feel that facilitators are present and engaged? For instance, in our program, participants co-design how they want the garden to look and feel. So there's ownership there for sure. And lastly, empowerment, which is skill building, learning grounding roots. An example is we meditate every time we start class and we move. And one important point from this arc is about how our outer gardening and inner gardening are similar and more importantly, how they're connected. So I'm just going to end with that slide shared there, if you don't mind. And before I end, I'll share a few things. Hi, Michelle, be done and you're up next. Why is it important to develop and facilitate a program in women's prison that is responsive and gender or even non-conforming gender and informed by trauma and healing? How does it impact a reentry experience and outcome for women and girls who leave the carceral system? So let's really embody and think about that. I don't think it's a stretch to the imagination to see the correlation between prison programming and reentry. As my colleague Michelle Scott will share with you about her experience, and Jamal as well, of reentry and all the systemic hurdles they've had to overcome. The struggle of reentry is especially difficult for women because they are most often the primary caregivers for their children, right? The added stress and necessity to re-enter quickly in order to support or reconnect with their family is a unique aspect to women. And although both men and women struggle to successfully transition back into society after prison, women often have this added burden that compounds with all of the other hurdles to reentry. And I'll end with this: the institutional and systemic gender and racial discrimination are important elements to consider and address in programs to the degree that programs can. Doing so will enable the women in prison to have better clarity on how so many things are interrelated and interconnected, and a better chance at surviving reentry. And I think furthermore, doing so will allow for program providers, scholars such as yourself, and policymakers to grasp the blatant disparity in services and structure that further oppress women in prison. And I just want to say, we can no longer say, I don't see gender when it comes to developing programs and dismantling a patriarch structure embedded within our carceral system. So that's what I have to share with you all today. And thank you for having me on the panel. I turn it on to Michelle Scott, I believe.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Thank you. That's really informative. That really, shines a light into, what's really happening inside and how, and how much different women are treated than men within the carceral system. And to that point, Michelle Scott, thank you for being here. We want to ask you a question, especially given all your experience and your participation in Site Garden. On the inside, what does healing and healing power of gardening and connection to nature mean to you?
So Andrew and Matt, Michelle's having a hard time turning her audio on. Do you have any suggestions for her?
It's really, I don't know.
Michelle Scott, can you hear? Yeah, she can't hear anything and she's unmuted. Matt, what do you suggest?
Maybe if we can get her the number to call in instead of through the video, because she's showing us she's unmuted here.
Okay, that's great. Maybe Jamala can start and Michelle, we can get you a telephone number.
As a matter of fact, if you would repeat the question, I could take a stab at it.
Yeah, I got you, Jamala, and thank you for stepping up. Given your extensive stay incarcerated and all your experiences with IGP inside the institution and outside institution, what about the healing power of gardening in connection to nature? What's special about it?
Well, in addition to being formerly incarcerated, I am an alum. I did complete the program on the inside. And when I actually came in contact with IGP for the first time, I was just being released from general population after a long 15-year stay. And one of the things that I believe I left in solitary was, my ability to socialize. Being away from people for so long, you don't use it, you lose it. And I certainly lost it. And I recall being, fresh in general population in the back of my cell with the lights cut off, just overwhelmed with sound and people walking by and noise and all of the things that you experience, just in the normal course of the day, interacting with other human beings, which was new to me. So I saw a sign up list for Inside Garden. And in that time, that 15 years, Pelican Bay Security Housing Unit is incredibly restrictive. I mean, there are no windows in the cell. Your access to sunlight is incredibly limited to other people. There's no grass, trees. It's literally all concrete and metal. So seeing a sign up list to touch some dirt, and it was as simple as that. I had no idea what IGP was, but I beeline to it and signed up for it. And it turns out it was the best decision of my life. The gift it continues to give is connected to everything good in my life to this day, including getting out of prison. But the impact of the garden, the impact of the staff that it had on me inside prison was it kind of created an oasis. It did kind of restore and help rebuild that natural connection that human beings have to nature that most of us overlook because we kind of take it for granted. And I needed that. I didn't know I needed it. But from a social standpoint, prisons are incredibly divisive, violent places based in criminality and gangs. There's a lot of, you can't talk to this person, hang around that person, like this person. And IGP was 2 hours a week where all that fell to the wayside. Everybody in my class, when we walked through that threshold for 2 hours, it was just normalized. And when I say normalized, I mean in relation to society, not prison norms, which is what we live by every single day. That's what it brought to me: peace and security in an insecure, violent construct. And that was the beginning, really, of my transformation. At that point, I was incapable of doing the work I needed to do in other areas of my life, like dealing with addiction and gangs and all of these things. I just absolutely would have been incapable of sitting in those circles and attending those groups without IGP. That calm kind of helped me to re-socialize and reconnect to people and learn how to be introspective and not only be introspective, but articulate what it was I was seeing and feeling. And that's something that was completely foreign to me to that point. But these are necessary to things like sobriety, which is probably, which is foundational to my transformation. And that began with IGP. So that's how it impacted.
Thank you. It's Michelle is back. Hi, Michelle. If you can,
Hi.
Perfect. We can hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, it's technology. It's still something that I'm learning. So hi everybody, and thank you for your patience.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a really good point, and I want to touch on that first. Michelle did a long-term incarceration, and I think what we noticed with people coming back home is cell phones were invented and became much more popularized while some of our folks were locked up. Emails were new at that point, right? And so when we come across folks who may not know technology, they're right at the infancy of all this. In a lot of ways, they're catching on quick. I mean, Jamala, geez, like he's hit the ground running and really being able to understand and know technology. And so I really want to take a moment to uplift that. It is a thing that we know is an issue within Inside Garden, but we think it's also something that we should also let you know. So when you come across these things, we can offer grace, we can offer patience, we can be kind, and we can just, help folks through what difficulties they might be experiencing. And so, Michelle, with you back on, given your incarceration experience, What about the healing power of gardening and connection to nature is special to you?
Well, honestly, it helped me. It helped me deal with the fact that I was serving 2 consecutive life without the possibility of parole sentences. So being able to go out and grow a marigold for the first time, water plants, it was a means to cope with my time. And I was lucky that I had various staff who realized they had an exceptionally stressed new LWOP on their hands. And so they allowed me the privilege to be outside and work in the dirt. And along that became like a process of not only growing and tending the plants, it was helping me to reconnect with a sense of humanity. And part of that process was being creative. Like, we don't have the opportunity to go out to a garden store and buy mulch, fertilizer. So we had to utilize, what we had. And that meant, like, I would take a broom and sweep grass clippings when they would mow the facility lawn. And I would use the grass clippings for compost, for mulch. We collected our own seeds. Some hoses. So as a community of gardeners, we would collect the water from the laundry room. And what I noticed is gardening that initially was just to help me with my time and something I did on my own, I found it was more powerful the more I connected with others, worked in community with others, and even began to mentor new people coming in. Here's how you prune a rose with a can lid from a tuna can. Here's how you make compost. And so building up and mentoring others was also, again, encouraging me to believe in myself that, I was still a human being and that I had something to offer others. Now, part of this process was also facing opposition, because you don't always find that correctional to having a garden. And so I found my voice in that I may accept that I committed a crime and I should be in prison, but don't try to tear out my plant, my tree, or my marigold. I'm going to fight for it. And so I learned to advocate. I started to advocate for the plants. I started to advocate for other women to come out and garden. One of the best moments I ever had was, there's a prisoner guards union, right? Very powerful. And I had one come to me and say, I have filed a complaint with my union. And I said, okay, because your garden, it's like it's a botanical garden out here. And we just can't have that in prison. And my takeaway was, wow, so it looks like a botanical garden? Nice. And or I had an officer that said, when I stand here, that tree in your front of the unit, I can't see the chow hall. So and said, well, then move to just again, I found advocacy and I found something, to believe in. And there were many stories of that through the 27 years that I was gardening inside. Really all changed when IGP came in and we had finally formalized support for the garden. We had access to tools, we had curriculum, and it meant I could also connect to a bigger community of people who are also interested in plants within the prison community. And I was seeing the difference in the individuals who were part of IGP. I was seeing a difference in how they carried themselves, how they interacted, and even in the topics of their conversation, because something new had been introduced into their world besides doing time.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Michelle. I do want to highlight, because you were at CCWF's,
Yes.
the garden over there. You mind describing what's going on over at CCWF? The size of the garden, and maybe even describe it?
Are you talking about the garden that's outside the chapel?
Yeah, the inside garden.
So yeah, the actual grounds, what I loved about it is there's been, I think, 2 installations, and that the women that were part of the IGP program were incorporated out and do the installation, and it offers a place of being quiet, a place of unity, a place you don't really feel like you're in prison because you have this big wall overhead. And there's all joy in curriculum that's teaching about xeriscaping, about drought tolerant plants. And so it's not only educational, but it's like a therapy. It's like a therapeutic place where the women can go. And again, I can't emphasize reconnect with the humanity that was within them, because the language of a garden has no politics, has no strife. It's growing plants, and it's being excited about seeing a lavender plant sprout or watching the birds, flit around. And it offers like this oasis and a balance to what what the environment is like in prison. And definitely when we initially would go out, we would go to the garden for about a half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we would go inside and sit in a circle. And that's where the IGP curriculum would come into place. And again, it's getting a group of individuals to speak about not only how they connect with the systems that support and nurture a garden, but what are the systems that work within us, and how do we nurture and encourage one another? So to me, it really draws a complete circle that was missing when it was just us running outside with a hose and growing plants in front of a housing unit.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll also kind of describe it. It's an 8,000 square foot garden inside of a prison. It's huge.
Yeah.
There's a labyrinth in there. And then I think what's one of the coolest features of that garden is that it's accessible. So, once people are out of the building and they're on the yard,
Yes.
People actually can go to it. So it's not necessarily sectioned off. It's open access. And I think that touches a little bit on Ruth's question in the chat, which is like, how is it different from men's prisons? None of men's prisons that I know of is an open space where they can easily access the garden. And so I think that's pretty cool that it's set up that way. And I just wanted to put that out there. And you also
may I add on to that? Also, what's different is there are benches set around some of the pathways through the garden where you can sit and again have a moment of either solitude or just being alone, because these rooms are usually housed with seven or eight other people. The rooms are exceptionally cramped. So just the privilege of being outside in the open, unfettered without the concrete walls, is huge. And you're right, anybody walking by is open and allowed to walk within the whole gardenscape, sit down on a bench. Sometimes I would see the women writing letters, having a little lunch, or just sitting there, tilted towards the sun, soaking in, a quiet solitude moment. And you do not find that in men's institutions, especially with you get left out for anybody.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I know you're kind of short on time, and I want to touch a little bit on one other question before you depart, which is, you talked a little bit about the curriculum. What about the curriculum is its approach is trauma informed, and then what did you pull from it?
Great question. One of the things that I remember from sitting in the groups is we were talking about like pruning and composting and taking something that would be, thrown away or of no use and reincorporating it into something that has value and has purpose. And I remember we sat in a circle and we discussed how that applied to our own lives, because certainly being in prison, we've been pruned away and separated from society, from our family and loved ones. And, the process of incarceration is not to build up, it's to demean and demoralize, and to find a way to still take what are the remnants of our life and our personhood and find the value in that, the nutrients in that, how to fuel it and feed it and grow it. That was some of my takeaways from the IGB curriculum, because it tied in beautifully. The cycle of plants and earth and nature is very similar to what's happening inside of us and within us. And the curriculum touched on that beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you. And while we have you here, there's one more question, and that is, can you describe your reentry experience? Like what was successful, what it wasn't, and maybe some obstacles that you may face either systemically or because of obstructionists or whatever might be in your way.
Okay. Well, I was required by the parole board to go to a 6-month residential treatment program. And it was, the way it was set up, it was exceptionally regimented, exceptionally carceral. And the contrast to that is the majority of the male transitional programs, they check in the morning and they have to be back by 10 o'clock at night. Whatever they're doing during the day, you know, get a job, find a job, whatever. And the majority of the programs that were open to women, which are very few, they're so regimented that you literally are up from 6:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night. You're lucky if you have a 15-minute window to do anything. And you have to earn through getting a job or what else, any kind of privilege to go out during the day unsupervised. Huge, huge difference. Also, I found that for, as a woman re-entering into society, I was funneled into very specific counties and very specific programs, whereas with men, they have tremendous resources and tremendous programs to meet their needs. So those are some disparities that I encountered on my own. Overall, I believe that residential programs are a plus, but they need to look at each individual coming through there, because not everybody is coming out of prison with drug addiction issues. Not everybody is coming out of prison and doesn't know how to do time management. And instead of like specializing the case management, they just have like a cookie cutter. We're going to run everybody through the same process. And I would say about 20% of what I had to deal with in the transitional program I was in was completely unnecessary. I was an individual who was mature. I had done 30 years of incarceration. I was highly motivated, focused, and driven and accomplished while inside. And I didn't need to have somebody telling me I couldn't work on my homework while I was cooking dinner in the kitchen. That was just nonsensical. So there were little things like that that I'm aware of in the men's programs. They actually don't have that much regimentation. And so I'm wondering, why is there more focus on women in that treatment and not on the men? Like, why couldn't the women be treated like, here, you're a grown adult, here's what you have to do, come back, sign in, and then we'll take care of it. I also want to stress, not enough programs to meet the needs of women. And there's a lot of women that are coming out of prison, and their two choices are maybe a sober living program that's right by Skid Row, or living with family that may not understand what that individual has gone through and may not be the healthiest choice for that individual.
Yeah, thank you for that, Michelle. Like, yeah, thank you for really offering that comparison and those insights. We know that you have to get back to your work, and we want to honor your time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, thank you. And we're gonna let you go. I'm gonna move my questions over to Jamala at this point.
Okay.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Jamala, so I mean, we just heard Michelle's question, and so I mean, you're on the Insight Garden reentry team, working as a coordinator. You know, given your background as a previously incarcerated person, what are some of the differences you see when you're trying to connect people with resources that are gender specific? What are you seeing in terms of what's out there for women? What are you having to do as the coordinator?
The difference is largely for women, they don't exist. Michelle really hit it right on the head. Resources for women are incredibly scarce, and that begins with housing. And then when you talk about choice, they have very little choice. If you're in a transitional home as a woman and it's not going great, you better hold on to it, or you might end up somewhere you might end up homeless. They may not have a bed for you. I mean, housing is just that scarce. They do not put resources into the women's side of it. And the overall reentry model by the state is made by men for men. Historically, the numbers have slanted in the favor of men in terms of just number of incarceration. We've pretty much turned the system over to private corporations. Bottom line is what? Money. Money is in numbers. Numbers. As a result, you have thousands of these beds in transitional houses dedicated exclusively to men. Some of the companies that are behind this don't necessarily care about the people in it. It's just about the bottom dollar. The system that we have encourages people to come into the system and open transitional houses who truly is about the dollar, not about, care or truly transitioning people back into freedom. And I just don't know that they see money in a return in allocating those resources to women. And in terms of my reentry experience, it was exactly as Michelle said. I was at a place where, I just could leave anytime from 6 to 10 o'clock, give them a clean drug test every week, and you're good. And for me, that is exactly what I needed. Like Michelle, I was mature and motivated. I knew what I wanted. I had support from family, from IGP, from friends. So I needed the space to go out and just make it happen. And I got that. There are always some who need somebody looking over their shoulders, follow them around and making sure they're doing the right thing. But there are a good many folks who don't. And Michelle is a perfect example of that. She's doing great. How much further along could she have been if she had been in my circumstance? So it became actually an impediment to rehabilitation, to transformation. It's really slowed her progress. She could be she's doing great, don't get me wrong. But again, how much further along could she have been without her transitional experience? And in terms of the gender component, I absolutely think, first and foremost, reentry plans should be based on the individual. Even within the male demographic, there are different people, different needs. But most definitely, I think something we all know that men are very different from women. Now, there are certain components that we can incorporate that transcend both, say, family reunification. That would be great for everybody, especially so for women, with children. Speaking as somebody, before I went to prison, I struggled with addiction. And I think it's 58% of women in prison struggle with addiction as well. And in that, there's usually damage to the family, some kind of familial rupture. And you're gone 10, 15, 20 years. That doesn't heal itself. That needs to be healed. Something that was kind of shocking to me, but I think it's indicative of the support we have for women, or lack thereof, versus men in society as a whole. Somebody who was in a women's prison was telling me about their visiting room. It's a ghost town. A men's visiting room is standing room only. You're literally limited so they can get other people in and out. And I think that's really telling as to how society views women. And I think how society views women is reflected in reentry, is reflected in how CDC deals with women inside and out.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, and I want to touch on it a little bit more, which is, the visiting rooms. Just those who are visiting are primarily women too.
Yep.
And so whether it's at a men's prisons or women's prisons, those who are coming to visits are primarily women as well. Yes. And they are also exposed to some of the surveillance and security that the prison implements unfairly. There are, I won't go into prison rules, but there are many instances where women are definitely treated different than men, yes. Just in the visiting component of it. I just want to say thank you, Jamala, for your work statewide. Jamala is having to help people really connect people with resources through California. And I just want to kind of remind people how big California is. We have a prison down south called Calpatria, and then we have one up north called Pelican Bay. I've just now Googled the map, and it's a 15-hour drive from one part of the state to the other. And so that's a lot of ground to cover. And with statewide reentry, can you describe what it's like in places not called Los Angeles, the Bay Area, or San Diego, and trying to find resources, particularly for women?
And when we should scratch San Diego. As affluent as they are not friendly to people coming out. They do not have resources there. And when I was speaking about a lack of resources, I was actually talking about the actual population centers like Los Angeles and San Francisco. You think that there would just be these, huge places, but there's actually not. And this is not, about local government. This is systemic. This is far deeper than that. This is the system as a whole does not really make space for women. Women just become like an extra appendix, an arm or a leg or something. It's not central. The approach to women is one, not by women. It's not for women. It's literally modeled for men, and they fit women in. And I was actually discussing this with somebody in parole, and his answer was, going back to something I said earlier about numbers. But he was saying, yeah, but now we're getting a lot more women, so it's going to change. And I don't know that really, did you really think about that, what you just said? Like the cure is putting more women in jail. And once they have numbers, then they'll have more resources. And sometimes I kind of feel like that's what we're waiting on, for their numbers, which are already skyrocketing. And I think Michelle said 475% in the last 20 years, which are already skyrocketing. So yeah, that can't be the answer. That can't be the cure. I think the answer is not only in the reentry side, but even inside, developing gender-specific programming, things that deal with domestic violence and abuse, family reunification, addiction, from a woman's perspective. It's not a general thing, and that's how we approach it. And when we say general, we mean men, from a male perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Jamala. I want to kind of turn this to Michelle right now. I have a question. And so in terms of women, what are some of the things that you've noticed as a program manager that women, may need during their reentry that would be different than what men are receiving, especially as it, pertains to Insight Garden and how things are happening across the state? Sorry to pose that on you, just throw it on you that way, but.
Yes, for sure. I don't have my hands so much in reentry, but all I can say is that even from the very basic hygiene toolkit that women receive out from the get-go is not even suffice to meet their needs. And I think from a systemic lens, there's definitely, in the way that we house women, and I think Michelle, Scott, and Jamala have pointed out the disparity in the access to housing in a way that is convenient for family reunification, right? They're much further away from their families. And so housing situation has a different take when it comes to housing women. After reentry, employment also is a big deal. What kind of services, employment services are available to women during reentry? A lot of the men that I've experienced have access to, let's say, driving trucks or other forms of life skill that can provide some sustainable financial security. Women necessarily don't have that in reentry. So I think there's not much to be said about the need for gender-specific services in reentry, and not just in prison programming. And so mental health services, for example, we're dealing with trauma. And I think one of the things I pointed out in my slide is that, sexual trauma, sexual abuse, that's the entry point for juvenile system for girls, right? We don't address that in prison programming, and less so in reentry. And you still have that. And so the probability of re-entering the system is greater because of these lack of services, and that is gender specific.
Andrew, if I could just piggyback on that really quickly.
Please.
I do want to say that something that's central to incarceration in a lot of cases is addiction. Addiction for women looks very, very, very different than addiction for men. Very different. And it should be addressed in that spirit.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Jamala. I want to just keep it right back on Michelle for a second. You working in CIW, women's prisons. There's many pieces that kind of make this happen, right? We have our own internal parts of Insight Garden, right, where we have Michelle and we have Jamala, we have myself and others, and we have the people who are participating in our program, right? We have all that. And then we also have another piece, a third piece, I would say, which is like the correctional officers, administration, the prison, the politics, the things that like really are out of our control, where we don't have much influence into that area. And so I just want to highlight that, even, just talking about genderized incarceration. Michelle, what are some of the ways that like that third component shows up, and does it make it easier or difficult to provide programming for women as their male counterparts?
I'm not sure if I can give good answer to that question. But one of the things I do want to point out is that sexual abuse and trauma continues and even exacerbated inside prison. So trauma is, is further exacerbated, and the oppression of women in prison. And there's definitely, like I said in my presentation, the patriarchal system within the carceral system is there. It's very blatant in the way that we choose what kind of programming is allowed. There's a lot. I've been told by some staff that we are closing down a certain yard because they're just too emotional, right? And so there are a lot of these gender discrimination and oppressive policies in prison that are happening. And so, like you said, a lot of it I can't control. Every time I step into the facility, I have to make sure that I check myself that I'm a guest, because I can easily be taken out and be told no programming today for whatever reason, and you're just going to have to go and not provide programs for women in prison. And that for me has been heartbreaking, especially, and I just want to point out, especially during the pandemic, right? So while we pivoted our programming to provide correspondence via mail, I've been told that both by prison staff and also by women in prison, that they're just, it's isolation is not even the word. It's deeply lonely and isolated. And I'm not sure if that's partly to do with the women's prison or just prison in general, I think, but there's much to explore in that area, I think, Andrew. But not only, I think, and different prison facilities have their own politics, but there's also the statewide politics around how we facilitate programming in prisons. Sorry, I can go on and on, but thank you for that question.
No, and thank you for asking or for answering that question. Yeah, it's incredibly difficult sometimes, at least from what I'm seeing on my end of things. Yeah, it can be incredibly difficult to offer programming inside women's prisons. I think sometimes, the staff is trying to be very protective of women because they are women, and sometimes even hinder some of the programming that could be taking place inside. And so,
and
yeah.
I just say they know how to weaponize, right? Using visitation from their kids or phone calls or things of that sort are used because they know what impact that would have.
Yep.
Right. So I know that we've had some questions in the chat, and I just wanted to see if anybody wanted to, while I review the questions, wanted to unmic themselves and potentially ask their questions, and kind of open it up to the group right here. Okay, well, I'll come back. I'm going to go back to Ruth's question. I know we answered, part of that, and I just wanted to see if any of our panelists wanted to go a little bit further on it. And the question is, how do men's gardening programs differ from those offered to women, and any generalizations? I
would say security. They are different environments, and yeah, like Michelle was speaking to access, open access. I was in Lancaster, and we absolutely did not have open access. It was something that would have been great because it wasn't uncommon to see men piled around the gate, at on their way to the chow hall and hearing the guard, just keep it moving, but they're like entranced with what's happening in the garden. So it would have been a great thing. Yeah, but security. They are really like over the top in maximum security male prisons. Even they see every bit of soft dirt as somewhere a weapon or drugs could be hidden. That's why there are no trees. They obstruct gun sites for gun towers. So yeah, I would say that is the biggest challenge in men's prisons. I think they even had a requirement in Lancaster where the plants could only be knee high or less. If somebody could hide, that kind of thing. A lot of those kind of rules.
Right. Yeah, and I think, yeah, you bring up a really good point too. It makes me think to a question I heard Michelle ask a couple of weeks ago about like the transformation that we are doing at Insight Garden inside prisons, like the land, how much land we are repurposing from what would be a nature deficit sanitized space of nature to now a full-on garden. We're, at Insight Garden, we work with folks inside, and so to be able to teach our curriculum, we formulate these gardens, and we in partnership with the incarcerated people and in the prison, and and just being able to transform a space that was growing nothing. I think it's really, really, I think, special. And also another little special part of it, which is, some of the soils where where prisons are at are toxic. In some of the prisons, we're having to rebuild the soil by building it up, by, taking it out and then, bringing in, new compost and being able to do it that way, because people are dying of valley fever at that prison. And if you're not familiar with it, it's people breathe in the dust and it infects the lungs. And so it's a real concern with making sure that, we can go ahead and revitalize the land that was toxic to incarcerated people.
In terms of, if I could just say one thing, Andrew, like what we're doing inside of prisons with gardens, when I think about that, I think about, when I first came to prison, and I think it's kind of indicative of the changes that have taken place. Hella slowly, but they are there. When I first came to prison, there were no, what we call free people, allowed access to maximum security prisons. There were no programs, there was no rehabilitation, they didn't even play at it, no groups, nothing of the sort. A garden would have been just like unthinkable. So to have even a single garden on prison is just incredible. There are literally people in maximum security prisons, including myself, who hadn't seen a tree in 30 years. So to introduce somebody to something green, I mean, that's like magical. And I know it's a hard thing to really comprehend, because, in freedom, you kind of take it for granted because we walk by greenery every single day. But it's absolutely incredible. It's magic.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tamala. Ruth is asking another good question. And then Ruth, do you want to come off mic and maybe ask that?
Yeah, I'm curious if women are interested in growing medicinal plants in terms of tea or other types of uses.
Yes, most definitely. I think the interest and desire is there to grow anything from drought tolerant native plants to medicinal plants. The problem though sometimes is, if we're even allowed to grow any of that, right? We are confined within a system in which we have really no control at times to determine what can be planted. In some of our prisons, we can't plant vegetables. We can't plant certain plants. We just can't. And so while the women may advocate for medicinal plants, it's not guaranteed. And unfortunately, that's the reality of how different prison facilities, depending on who's running it, just kind of how, the dice just roll.
Because I would think with trauma-informed curriculum, some of these, lavender, and in terms of it de-stressing people, and there are ways of having sachets, but I realize, carrying something from the garden away would be difficult to do, I guess.
Yeah, I think you asked a really good question too, Ruth. It makes me excited because we have a staff member who's not on a panel right now, but she is really good with this stuff. I've witnessed her talk about calendulums over at another prison, and the way she spoke about it and the information that she was providing about it, and also offer like the generalizations that sometimes come with plants, like the bright colors, what they mean, and how to interpret them. And so she really goes into the healing components and how to dry out flowers, and really know how to grow and use the medicine with it right there within the prison. And that information is really shared with the people right there in the circle. So there is a lot of that going on. Of course, it depends on who's holding the space and, you know, their knowledge base. We have a ton of people who are extremely knowledgeable in a lot of different ways. And so I see your hand, William, but I'm going to get to Althea. Can you want to ask your question?
Yes, I was, you know, there were times like when Jamal was talking about being in solitary, etc. It's nice when you can be outside with others and participate in the gardening and things, but I'm also always concerned about how life is being lived the majority of the time inside. Are there garden opportunities inside the facility, inside your own space, or, you know, it's just, you know, you're kind of tortured living, and then maybe you might have access to that opportunity to be gardening. So I was just concerned about that and how to kind of help people cope on a day-to-day, minute by minute basis.
You know, in my experience, the program itself was the safe space, that 2 hours a week. It would be great if we could have lived like that 7 days a week, if we had that container, we could take it back to the housing units. But when you step out of that classroom, you're back in prison. That's the reality of it. That's the shame of it. There's an imprint that you can take with you in your heart, but the realities of prison and separation and division and all of those things pick right back up outside the door. So ultimately, I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do. And as somebody I work for always says, we're in partnership with an unreliable partner. So the commitment to that transformation is not always there, but that's what we're trying to do, transform the culture of prison, where it doesn't just stop at the doorway of a particular group or class.
Yeah, and I think let me add to that, because we have a prison in California named Avenal, and I just want to highlight that because there are, you know, we've talked about some of the bad, but I think, you know, it's also important to recognize the good. And over at Avenal, we have a former participant who's no longer part of our program, and he is planting all around certain buildings throughout the entire prison. And so this yard over in Avenal is being beautified. And if you know anything about California and Avenal is just very isolating place. It's hot, it's dry, and it's in the middle of the Central Valley. And there's really not much, like the closest city is Fresno, and that's over an hour away. So it's really in the middle of nowhere. And we have this guy inside who's part of our program, just beautifying this ugly space with like sunflowers and fruits and vegetables. But I think the other part is the culture of the prison. The culture in that prison has really allowed for a partnership between the custody staff and the incarcerated population. And so these spaces where he's growing are usually under lock and key, and he's getting access to it to tend to the gardens. So there are opportunities once the culture inside the prison changes to do more gardening. And so it really takes like being friendly and kind to the correctional officer, really winning their hearts over and showing the transformative nature of like people, what they're doing inside the program and how gardening really supports that. It went so far as they're building a koi pond on that prison yard. And I'll just kind of leave it as that. They have a koi pond on a prison yard. And I think that's really huge. And it really shows the relationship that the incarcerated population have with the custody staff. And so we are seeing changes in some facilities. Some are faster to adopt those changes than other prisons. All right, sorry. I wanted to get to William. William, you had your hand up a little bit ago. You have a question?
I don't have much of a question, just a little bit of a statement I'd like to make. I'm really glad I got to come into this session, and because hearing about women and what's going on with women and in prisons and the incarceration rate of women in prison is really heartbreaking, you know, to me. And it's indicative of the larger environmental problem that we have in terms of how we, women are usually associated with the earth, and, we do not see our connection a lot of times to the environment and the earth, and we abuse it. How we treat our women, you can see it in the politics with our last president, and the fight against, more so for businesses rather than women, and how women were just seen as objects, to be used, for men's sexual pleasure. The same thing with the earth, just an object to be used for, exploitation for economic purposes and so forth, and so it gets me to thinking how the problem, in dealing with women has to go beyond more than just focusing on women in the prison. It has to go beyond that and deal with the larger aspects of society in terms of our culture, in terms of how we view our connection to each other and the environment, and you brought up the situation, about working with, California, and how Andrew in California, how a successful program was about the incarcerated person, people working with the people who are incarcerated, keeping them incarcerated. There has to be a joint effort between people. I don't think we can get anywhere by demonizing the opposite, group, or separating people. I think there has to be a joint effort between people. I was incarcerated here in New York State, and facilitated the creation of a garden program at Woodburn Correctional Facility through Bard College, the Bard Prison Initiative. And that program could not have gotten off without the support of the staff, and working with the warden and working with the officer staff, made it a success. So having that view, I know a lot of times we demonize cops, we demonize, this could also demonize men. It could become men versus women, and you have the separation of genders and the race. But I think it's very important to bring people together. And I like to hear, more of what you just talked about, Andrew, and how we could bring that to other prisons that don't have that connection, don't have that staff working together. How can we broaden that perspective and then move it outside, to the rest of society? That's the only statement I want to make. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Powerful words. I mean, really good stuff to think about, good things to implement. I mean, people are deserving of kindness regardless, right? And it has to, really needs to go both ways. Like, we can't just always be taking of it and not necessarily giving it out either. And so you're right, just realizing the similarities between women, the earth, good partnerships, and just being kind to each other is all really important. Is there anybody else who has a question? Oh, sorry, I see some more in the chat.
Andrew, before you move to the next question, I just want to say thank you, Liam, for that empathy that you just shared within this space. And the other thing that I wanted to also encourage us to do is to do a lot more coalition building amongst programs, right? Because we're working in silos. And so I think it's important to not only work with prison staff but also the programs who are doing programming in prison. I think it's important for us to continue to strengthen that community and coalition building.
Thank you, Michelle. I see Sue's question here. I can either ask her or Sue can ask it. All right, IGP has run into the problem of lack of correctional officers available to escort and monitor the incarcerated gardeners, and Philly online classes got canceled because facility was so short staff, the correctional officers, that there was no one to escort students to the computer lab.
Andrew, you want me to answer that real quick?
Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda. I work with Insight Garden program as well. And I just want to say, since the prisons reopened with the waning of the pandemic, we are really struggling with the issue of staff shortages, staff slowdowns. There's been issues with staff not going to work because of a new rule around needing to wear body cams in prisons, and also some of the issues around vaccination. So the shortages of staff has significantly impacted our ability to deliver programs.
Thank you, Amanda. I want to get to Kirk's question because I think that's really important. How much access is there to literature, scientific journals, online education, podcasts, and YouTube? And I'll kind of start with this because I helped start a 4-year degree program over at Folsom and Mule Creek. And this is one of the things that we really struggled with when we were starting it up, which is, many libraries inside prisons are really built for like leisure type reading. They're not necessarily there to have updated, peer review journals. There's, the literature that they do have that is, more, I would say scientific, would be more closely aligned with the law and being able to put together procedures so that people can, work on their writs of habeas corpus or whatever it might be that they're experiencing. And so in California, we've been working on a way to create an intranet where the links that are built within some of these online journals, these peer-reviewed journals, like at JSTOR, some of these other publications, they don't necessarily take you outside of the links don't necessarily go outside of that article as if you were on outside and you're like, okay, let me click this citation. And so they're trying to build it into where it's very self-contained. And there's been a lot of kind of push on that. But there has been, more access, in terms of like the podcast and YouTubes. I'm sure many of us have heard that there is a podcast called Ear Hustle. And it's a very popular podcast. But what you may not know is there's one called Pelican Bay Unlocked. It's not necessarily a very popular podcast, but it is one nevertheless. And it is shared on the institutional TV within that prison. And so the men at Pelican Bay are capable of, put in their communications class, go ahead and work on a podcast, receive course credit for it, get the experience, and then be able to share that with the rest of the incarcerated community as well. So depending on the type of media will depend on like where it's being able to be shared with. Michelle or Jamala, do you want to also touch on maybe the libraries and inside prisons?
Yeah, I think it's becoming, we're starting to get a lot more technology inside prisons. They're starting to pass out the tablets and the college programs. At least in Lancaster now, they're giving out, CSULA operates in Lancaster, and they're actually giving out laptops. Now, of course, these are not devices that can like access the internet, but foundationally, those things are coming into play, and I think it'll expand over time. More and more access will be available.
Thank you. Okay, so I know there's a few more questions in chat, and we have 10 more minutes, and I really want to be respectful of everybody's time. But I do want to ask everybody, because we were always, Michelle talked a little bit about silos, and to be able to get through some of these silos, it would be also nice to learn a little bit about you who are in our audience. And so we're really interested in if there's anybody here who's, participating or managing an ecotherapy program in prison, and what have your experiences have been like? And if that's you, feel free to, come off mute and share your experience with us. Nicole.
Am I the only one? That's weird. Usually I'm like in a room with a bunch of people who have done this. My name is Nicole Alexander. I participated for SPP, the Sustainability in Prisons project. I was a butterfly technician for 3 years, breeding the endangered tailored checker spot butterfly. We also had gardens connected to our location. We had butterfly gardens wrapped around our greenhouse. Oh, hold on, which we used to feed our butterflies during breeding season, or I heard somebody mention lavender. I had thyme, had all that kind of stuff for the butterflies. And then we also had a very large community garden across the walkway from us that was upkept by other inmates in they were horticulture program. But I did that for 3 years. I actually gained access to my higher education through that program because Evergreen State College runs that program. So we did classes during off times of breeding season. We did them inside our greenhouse. We even had seminars. We had personally taught biology classes and other classes in which our instructor, who was a grad student at the time, had asked us, like, what are you guys interested in learning? Mind you, the prison that I was in is in Washington State. I was in a behavioral modification also at that time, so we weren't allowed TV. I was an intensive inpatient. There's just a lot of rules and regulations. And so we focused a lot on learning about endangered species and other parts of what we were already doing. I was able to come out of prison and I received higher level undergrad accreditation for the classes that I was doing inside of MCCW with SPP at the time. That if it wasn't for SPP, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. It looks like I'm just sitting in an office. I actually work for the Public Defenders Association. I'm now a grad student. I just finished my first half of my grad degree, like, you know, on Friday. I did my undergrad with them. I studied law and policy. I'm doing my grad with them. I'm studying master's in public policy and with an emphasis on policy and crime policy. Kind of hits home a little bit. And I'm currently applying for my PhD. These are huge things, right? But like really it was that butterfly lab that changed a lot of things. And I will say it was, so I was listening, right? And we walked outside that gate every morning. They opened up that gate. We had a special gate clearance. They opened up the gate and they let us walk out. And we'd walk all the way around the property. And if we were on PBS. PBS came out. We were like doing big things. Nobody knew we were doing big things. We were just like in this really cool program, right? Breeding butterflies. Nobody bugged us. Cops didn't yell at us. We'd walk out every morning and we'd walk around and we'd be outside the fence and we'd be in there all day by ourselves. You know, they'd come do rounds or whatever, check on us, count our heads and leave. And there was only 5 or 6 of us there. And during that time, my mom passed away. My daughter had a heart condition that was discovered. I was given more time. I went into behavioral, just everything that can compound, right? This wasn't my first stay or my second stay. So my recidivism rate was like 98%. That program changed everything about my journey, everything. And it was because the folks that came in respected us. They like literally told us like what we were doing was like amazing things and we knew what we were doing and we were given autonomy and we were treated as human beings and we were educated and we were given skills that when we walked out, we could utilize those skills with letters of reference, with support. And they actually, I mean, I don't know how it is in a lot of places, but in Washington State, you were not allowed to sign legal documents, legal contracts, which meant that when I applied for school, my application was in pen and paper, which nobody's ever heard of nowadays, right? That generation's gone. It walked out somehow. It found its way to Evergreen. My application fee was paid and I was accepted into college before I was ever out the door. And that was it, right? Like I showed up to school like with an ankle bracelet on and said, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this. Like, I'm just here. And they're like, just keep coming. We'll figure out the finances. We'll figure it out. Right. And that is it. That is the support. And I did it with very minimal technology, you guys. I used the butterfly computer to like type up a little entry essay, you know, like everything. And like, it was the whole time people saying, yes, you can do this. Like, this is what everyone else does. Why can't you do this? Right. And that peace, there's something different about being in a garden. There's something different about being in a lab where you're like with nature, with, you know, like all these things, like you're just caretaking as women. That's a thing as moms. I was able to design a troop leader for the Girl Scouts Beyond Bars, designed a badge work and had the girls come out, have the daughters, our daughters come out. So it was like a bring your daughter to work day while we got to do Girl Scouts, while they got to earn badges, you know, just like that 2 hours of being a real mom, right, is huge. And so that changes a lot of things. Somebody mentioned on here that they use our kids against us, like as a punishment. And that is a fact. Because I was in behavioral treatment, if I didn't make my bed and I got an infraction, I would not have been able to see my daughter for 6 months in Girl Scouts. That is disgusting, right? And like that is, so clearly I'm passionate about it, you guys. I work still, I'm definitely, you know, still in the higher education thing, but I work in homelessness right now. And I still am a troop leader. I digitally sell Girl Scout cookies for the Incarcerated Moms troop. And I do everything I can to like bridge that gap for moms, but it's hard as women to have that held against you. And even our moms that have Boy Scouts, I fought for years to get Boy Scouts at this camp. And when we finally got it, they made a regulation, no kids over 14, no boys over 14 could come. And my son was an Eagle Scout at 17 and wasn't even allowed to come after I fought to get it. I know that I love hearing other prisons, other properties are doing these amazing things, giving peace, giving healing. Our sweat lodge is right next to our butterfly lab, which is right next to our community garden, and it's all outside the fence. And I think that's key to peace. I think it's key to know that those speakers that you do occasionally hear out there are not blaring towards you, above you, you are behind them. And I think there is healing no matter what. I mean, it's hard. Nobody can completely heal inside prison. I challenge anybody who says that they can. You can heal, but you cannot completely heal through things that you're still being forced through. There's, and you know, here's the deal, like what somebody said, when class is over, you're back into bringing to prison. Yeah, because we had to be strip searched every day. Every day I had to be strip searched going out and coming in. So it doesn't matter what you experience out there, you are immediately reminded that this is what you are, right? So I'm working with Evergreen right now to help try to the new higher education and to bring it into all the prisons. And I'm really, really excited about that and giving other folks opportunities to have that step on their journey. So sorry to take over your thing. I'm so used to everybody else being from SPP.
You're good.
Thank you, Nicole. You're good. Thank you.
Yeah, I will just say, I do want to encourage you, if you have that link to your Girl Scout cookies, to drop it in the chat. Who knows, you know, like some of us like cookies. I know I do. And so, yeah, drop that link in the chat, and maybe we'll get some sales going on if we have that going on right now. I know for myself, I have to get off. I will turn this over to Michelle and to
maybe to Matt,
and Matthew and Amanda.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, everyone, our presenters and everyone who's been here and sharing on this topic, and really importantly, bringing this lens of gender to all of us and initiating, I think, some important questions for all of us in discussion. So thank you. So I hope that many of you will join us here next week at the same time to continue the conversation. You can check out the full schedule. Next week, we have a session on art and nature as healing. And also you can encourage friends or colleagues to register. Registration is still open. So please do feel free to send that along and join us next week if you can. And finally, there's a place to on ecologiesofjustice.org. You can sign up to join an email list. It's a group list if you'd like to continue the conversation and share resources or reach out to people who are presenters or attendees. So thanks again to our presenters and to everyone for being here, and have a good rest of your day, and hope to see many of you next week.
Thank you, Matthew.